Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. We'll be discussing HC3 with scale computing, and we'll have a couple of experts on to take you through that. Before we get started, I want to point out a few features in the console. This webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive a link in a few days to view the webinar on demand. Also, this webinar is interactive, so get your questions in the Q&A widget on your screen, and we'll get to those at the end of our session and try to cover as many as we can. We also have handouts in the handout section where you can download some more information, so take a look there before we're finished. And lastly, we do have an attendee chat, so you can definitely get in there and have a conversation with your fellow IT pros. So as we get started, let me introduce our speakers for today. We have Scott Mann, Director of North American Channel at Scale Computing, and Michael Lyon, Product Manager at Scale. So with that, Scott, I'll hand it to you to get started.
Thank you very much, David. Welcome, everybody. As David mentioned, my name is Scott Mann. I'm the Director for North American Channel, and we'll have Mike Lyon here on the little later into the presentation as well to walk you through a UI presentation or UI overview, I should say, of Scale's HC3 platform. And today we're going to be going through Scale's platform and really how it's evolved into a perfect solution in the MSP forum. Developing a new MSP program for that community. So we'll touch a little bit on what's got us to there and specifically what that MSP program looks like, pricing and everything around that. So a quick agenda overview. HCI market. So HCI market's really evolved, especially over the last year, 2 years. And the technology itself and the trends in the industry that we're going to touch on and where this has really moved us to organically within some of the trends in the industry where our product has become a great fit into. And then just who Scale is, what exactly we do, what is the HC3 platform, and the target markets that it serves well into, which will segue nicely into hyperconverged infrastructure for MSPs and why it's a great fit in there, some of the challenges that we can address that we see many MSPs face, just an general overview of the solution and pricing so you can get kind of a baseline comparison. And then lastly, partnering with Scale, what it takes to partner with Scale. And then the fun part, we'll pass over to Mike, and he will jump into the UI overview. So to kick things off here, status of the HCI market. So this right here, I love this graph because it shows a snapshot of what the hyperconverged market. This is actually from a graph that was created last year, but the reason that I like it is because the trend is kind of going where everything was expected. You see at the bottom, the integrated systems, the reference architecture, those are kind of stabilizing out. There's not really any growth. There's not any decline either. Hyperconverged system, though, is growing exponentially. So I get a question a lot of the times, how does that make sense if it's not competing against the traditional infrastructure? Why is the hyperconverged infrastructure taking on such a greater share of the market? And that's because hyperconverged infrastructure isn't only benefiting those that are doing a traditional virtual storage and networking refresh. There's new trends in the industry that it can benefit. Because of the efficiency of the technology, specifically for Scale, the efficiency of the technology, some of the industries that it can benefit are, I'm sure a lot of you are hearing about edge computing and IoT. That's all the buzz right now. As well, and if you think of what an MSP is doing, it's very similar to what edge computing is the foundation of. It's smaller systems at the edge that need to be managed centrally. So these are some areas that I'm going to touch on later in the presentation that hyperconverged technology is now being able to benefit into. So that's why there's such a large exponential growth in the hyperconverged market, because it's creating new markets that typically traditional infrastructure wasn't able to have any benefit in. And the one main piece that I'm going to touch on the bottom right there, KVM-based or VMware alternatives, that's the fastest growing subsegment within the hyperconverged infrastructure. And the reason that's very important, obviously it segues into my next slide. Scale is based on a KVM platform, but we launched, just kind of give you a little history timeline of Scale. We were incorporated first in 2008. And really what we set out to do was we took a step back, and at this point, VMware had become the market leader within virtualization. And we took a step back to say, everyone's coming from a small, medium-sized organization. Where VMware fit into, there was a solution for it, but it wasn't purpose-built for. So the question was, what if we built a solution today, knowing all the new trends in technology and knowing what VMware had done and the platform had come to at that point, what would we have done differently to revolutionize this technology and make it purpose-built for that SMB environment? So we set out to challenge the status quo of what virtual infrastructure means to the small and medium-sized organizations, which is why you see in 2010 there that we adopted the KVM platform. That was a key underlying component to it because we wanted to eliminate the VTAX. We wanted to eliminate the VMware licensing that was associated with that. Come 2012 was when we first launched HC3. HC3 is our hyperconverged platform, and this is when the very first hyperconverged solution was basically came out, was launched. We launched it in at VMworld in 2012, and we launched it obviously as a VMware alternative. So it was a very bold statement that we made trying to launch it out there. We were never invited back to VMworld after that, but we definitely made a big statement when the VMware team came by to say, hey, this is a fantastic solution. How does it leverage VMware? And that's the great part. It doesn't. So very big statement back in 2012. This is before hyperconvergence was even a term that was familiar within the market. And then all of a sudden KVM became much more strongly adopted, with Google leveraging KVM as their platform for GCE. Apple transitioned from VMware over to KVM as well, and that was a huge hit for VMware. And then come 2016, we had over 1,500 customers that had adopted KVM, and KVM had now become more of a mainstream terminology. People didn't think of KVM as just keyboard, video, mouse anymore. It was a hypervisor, and it was a commercially accepted hypervisor, and it's grown to be one of the largest hypervisors used globally. Come 2017, we started a partnership with Lenovo, which has evolved quite substantially since then. If anybody keeps up with any of the Scale press, we've had some very interesting updates with Lenovo, more of a strategic partnership that we're launching next month, and that's with some round of funding and everything that we had back in October. So in 2017, we initially launched as kind of a meet in the channel approach, and now everything is becoming a much more strategic play with Lenovo. If anybody out there is using Lenovo, is a partner with Lenovo, we can definitely dive into that later. I can spend a lot of time talking about that. So if there is any questions, by all means, send us an email after, channel@scalecomputing.com, and let's have a conversation around that, and I can fill you in a little bit more information. And then 2017, we also launched, you can kind of see how we kind of foreshadowed in 2013 that Google uses KVM. In 2017, we launched our HC3 Cloud Unity platform, which is allowing us to do a hybrid cloud approach for DR as a service. So having an on-premise system and replicating to the cloud seamlessly without having to, basically looking like it's still being administered on your existing network. And then come 2018, we launched our HC3 Edge platform, which is really the foundation of what we're here to talk about today, is our MSP platform. HC3 Edge was built for edge computing, and it was, all of these things are just the system organically growing into new markets that the foundation of HC3 was built on, being a hyper efficient system, has been able to provide value in these additional new markets like edge computing. So I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. First, who is Scale? So Scale Computing, I love to call us the best kept secret in the industry, and it was almost a purpose. We were purposely the best kept secret in the industry because of the market we were going after. You know, when we launching, we're targeting towards that small, medium-sized enterprises. We can't go out there and be the ones funneling hundreds of millions of dollars into marketing and PR to build our brand. If we're doing that, we're driving up the cost of our solution, and then we're defeating the purpose of creating a solution that's purpose-built for the SMB. So we took a much different approach than many of our competitors did in the hyperconverged market, and I like to say we took a product-first approach. So we built a rock-solid product. Over these years, we've gotten thousands of customers, tens of thousands of systems deployed. You see some great technology partners out there. But the most important feature, the most important component of our HC3 solution was that we built in the comprehensive support to make it a solution that was easy for us to support from a support perspective, also a solution that was easy for our partners to support, and most importantly, a solution that was easy for the end users to support. So along the path, making it a solution that is seamless to deploy, that keeps the lights on, something that you don't have to tinker around with all the day, and when you need to call into our support team, you get the best-in-class experience that you've ever gotten. So from that, we've been able to sorry, next slide there. We've grown into becoming the most reviewed and highest rated HCI solution. By no means are we the biggest name out there, and have we spent nearly as much in marketing and PR as some of our competitors have. But if you go on Spiceworks and Google scale computing, which I'm sure everybody probably has, this is probably from this is a snapshot probably from at least a quarter or two ago. So this has probably even grown since then, maybe last quarter. So this has definitely grown since then, the amount of reviews we have on there. But this is because we don't tell anybody to go out and do that. We don't incent them to go and do that. They go out of their way to review what their experience has been like with scale. And if you think about it, when do you typically review something? It's one of two scenarios. On the one side of it, you had a terrible experience. You went to a restaurant and it was the worst experience ever. You're going to go on Yelp and you're going to write a review. On the other side of it, you had the best experience ever and you're going to write a review. Usually when it's mediocre, you don't really bother to review anything. It's usually on one end of the spectrum. And luckily, we're the latter of that instance, and our customers, our partners, they all go out of their way to give us a review on all these different peer review sites about how great the experiences have been with Scale. And if you go read through Tech Validate, Scale, Trust Radius, Gartner peer reviews even, it's kind of a common occurrence of what everybody's saying. The product is exactly what they said it'll do, and I don't have to spend time in the system tinkering around, going through a checklist every morning to get things done. The product just does what it does, and when they do have to call into support, that's usually when the reviews come in because they're just thrilled with the experience that they had with our support team. Now, what is hyperconvergence? Hyperconvergence has got to the point now that it's a very subjective term. It's kind of like cloud in the industry. Everybody's cloud, now everybody's hyperconvergence. And hyperconvergence to this company means something different than to that company, and all the use cases are a little different. So I like to define hyperconvergence based on what we coined that term as. So when we launched, we coined the term hyperconvergence, and based on that definition, we're the only ones that do hyperconvergence in the sense. So it's integration of compute, storage, and the virtualization layers into one single solution architecture. So it's combining the servers, the storage, the virtualization into one single OS, into one single platform where the servers, the virtual layer is speaking directly to the storage layer. There's no mediator or anything in between there of a broker server or a CVM, a controller virtual machine, or anything that needs to do any of that brokering, which consumes a ton of resources. So basically what we did was we went to the foundation of what traditional virtual infrastructure looked like, and we made it more efficient. We built it so that it all worked directly together, because over time, when it was just servers, and then all of a sudden we needed multiple servers, and then we wanted to be able to run multiple VMs on multiple servers, this had just evolved, and it became a little clunky over time. So we thought we could make this a lot more efficient by going back to the architecture of it and building it from the ground up, redefining what that architecture looks like to make it more efficient. And what do I mean by that? So the VSA approach, VSA is a virtual storage appliance. So if you think of, this is kind of the other approach to hyperconvergence in the industry versus the HC3 approach, which is the scale architecture. The VSA is basically taking the controller for the storage, a SAN, and virtualizing that. So the controller, consumes a lot of resources, a ton of cores and RAM, depending on the size of the SAN and everything. That still exists. It now just exists at a different layer in the stack. So now it exists at the hypervisor layer. And in an enterprise space where you've got petabytes of storage or you've got terabytes of RAM, losing 96 to 300 gigs of RAM to power on the machine, that is an insignificant amount. That's not going to be anything that's going to put a dent in it. But when you're talking about the customers that we're talking about, and we're talking the SMB space, that's where efficiency is king. And we need to make sure that we are running on a fraction of the resources, because we can't tie up all those resources, because that means there's less resources to use, which means you need to buy a bigger system, which means it's going to cost more. So we had to avoid that. So we use less than 12 gigs of RAM and a fraction of a core across a full cluster. So we can literally run a full workload on what a competitive solution would be able to just boot their machine up for. And that's why you can see it's a great fit in this market that we serve into. So just to give it a kind of an example here, a lightweight platform, and this is where we're kind of starting to get into the MSP scenarios here. You can see I'm kind of building up to it. A lightweight platform, let's just call it a 64 gig node. The competitive solution, at minimum, will run 24 gigs of resources consumed for the OS. So that gives it 40 gigs left. Still some room to probably run a VM or two. With us, only 4 gigs on that single node, so you have 60 gigs of resources left. You have a ton more space to be able to utilize. Now let's get even more efficient. Now let's go to even a smaller customer. We're running 32 gigs. They don't need much at the edge. That platform is consuming pretty much everything. You really can't run anything less on that node. Versus the HC3 platform, we're only consuming that 4 gigs still. So there's still enough resources to run those 2 or 3 lightweight VMs that they're going to be running on it. And this is what makes us a great fit in these target markets. So the way I picture this slide right here is you kind of go from left to right. That's kind of been like the evolution of markets for us. And it's all been from the same foundation. We haven't really had to change anything other than adding features on to support these, to support the growth within these new markets and everything that we're serving to. The foundation is still the exact same product that we serve, and everybody gets the exact same features across the board. But we started out in that SMB space, and to define SMB, it's a very ambiguous term depending on who you're talking to. Everybody uses it very loosely and what SMB means to them. So SMB to us is typically a smaller IT shop. It's an IT shop of sometimes 0 to 10 people in IT, where they're typically IT generalists, and they're being the jack of all trades. You know, they're managing the network, they're managing the storage and servers and virtualization. They're probably doing the help desk as well, and they've got a ton of different projects on their plate that they can never get to because they're constantly juggling, constantly being reactive and having to go fix any problems that happen at the data center, at their end users, and so on and so forth. That's where HC3 came in to be a perfect fit for it, because now HC3 takes you less than an hour to deploy. You get HC3 rack stack configured, everything set up in your data center, it's ready to go and start migrating over existing workloads. You get everything migrated over, you're going to set and forget HC3. And if you look at those reviews, so many of the people are, I read one recently, I think it was Mike that might have posted it online. One of the customers wrote a review saying, I don't even remember what scale support was like because it's been so long since I've had to even call into it. And that's what we want. We want these partners, or these customers and partners don't want to have to touch, go in and touch all of the different systems and go and play around into it. You want it to set it and forget it so that it's either a high revenue generating solution for you or it's a low cost solution for your customer. And then those same benefits that we give to the SMB, they have the same problems in distributed enterprises. So this is where edge started to come into play. Distributed enterprises are like retail companies, manufacturing organizations, healthcare, where IoT is starting to become more and more prevalent. And it's kind of funny because distributed enterprises, the data centers kind of come full circle. If you think back in time, it used to be just single servers at the edge at all of the remote sites. And then all of a sudden everything became centralized because we now have all virtualization, everything's connected over the WAN. They might have minimal resources running at the edge, but nothing, maybe a laptop or something. Now all of a sudden with IoT, there's becoming a need for more compute resources at the edge because there's all of these things that are consuming more compute resources. You've got, there's wearables in healthcare, there's digital signage, there's analysis of smartphones as you walk into a retail store, traffic control, shrinkage and everything if you're at a retail site or a grocery store. And now because of this need at the edge of all these compute resources, we're kind of going back to that distributed enterprise where they want to have an infrastructure at that edge, and a lot of analysis is being done at the edge where that information is very important and it needs to get back to the head office, it needs to get back to that central data center, but the immediate needs are at the edge. So we can build a system that runs on these small, tiny resources, right? Basically the price point of what they would want to typically pay for that server at that location, a beefy even laptop at that location to run their POS system and a few different applications. Now we can run this on a server, and now we can provide some redundancy for them at the price point that isn't breaking the bank. It's not a $50,000 or $20,000 at that site. We can run it on a very efficient system at the edge for them and have everything replicate back to the central head office. And everything replicating back is where the big data and everything happens. So in these scenarios, retail, typically there's nobody in IT at the edge. So if it's a grocery chain, there's not going to be an IT guy on site at all the different grocery chains, all the different branches. Now, if you think of what an MSP is, that's exactly what an MSP is doing. An MSP is becoming a central hub for all of their customers. So you're becoming you're basically providing services for all of your edge customers, but those customers vary in sizes and resources and exactly what they're going to need and their capabilities from a technical standpoint. They might have an IT team, they might be overwhelmed, they might not have an IT team at all, and you are the IT team that's completely outsourced for them. So from that perspective, what we built now for the edge and being able to manage everything under one umbrella, that's exactly what an MSP needs. But it's not the same pricing model that they need, because they're charging their customers differently than what a distributed enterprise would be charging their customers. So let's talk a little bit more about how that works. So HCI for MSPs. Nothing new about the product, or there's new features about the product that I'm going to get into in a second here, but nothing different from the product from what we'd offer on the edge side or on the SMB side. Just added features that make it easier for MSP to essentially manage everything. But more importantly, it's a new pricing model. It's a new pricing model that falls in line with what an MSP would be charging to their customer in their monthly recurring revenue model, their monthly recurring cost model. So now we can be a monthly recurring cost for you as well, so that you don't have that over-leveraged upfront CapEx. Where you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on a central infrastructure to be able to provide it and trying to make ends meet until you're getting enough monthly recurring to break even. We want you to be able to break even month one. So typically what we see in these in an MSP scenario is this is called, I call it the single server client, or I should say we call it a single server client. On the left side here on-prem, you've got that single server which is running maybe a terabyte, few terabytes, anywhere from 2 to 6, even 1 VM. But typically we see anywhere from 2 to 6 VMs being run at the edge. A single server is sufficient. That customer is okay to be down for 8 hours. They don't require to have any redundancy at the edge. Now, they don't want to be down necessarily, but if they were down for 8 hours, it wouldn't be the end of the world for them. So your SLA is probably like 24 hours with them. You're running VMware, maybe Hyper-V on top of that, and everything is being backed up locally to maybe an appliance where you can recover anything from quickly locally on the site, and then that appliance is probably replicating everything up back to whoever that appliance provided you with, back up to their cloud, or maybe you have a private cloud that you're providing everything for. So I bet you if I surveyed the room, a lot of people would say some similar variation of this is what a lot of their customers in that true S of SMB would look like. So I'm talking under 100 seats at this point where they don't need that redundancy. Sometimes it's even 10 seats, sometimes it's 5 seats, and so on. So the challenges that they face, and this slide hasn't been fully cleaned up yet, so it's a little wordy, but I'm going to talk you through it all. The challenges that the MSPs are facing, though, is that it requires a highly trained internal resources to maintain all this. With Scale Solution, you can run HC3 with a junior admin that they can do it all remotely. I've personally racked and stacked a cluster, and I'm going to show you the UI. Actually, Mikey's probably going to show the UI, but I can run through the UI with you, and it's just as easy to maintain on a day-to-day basis. I could train that junior admin for them, and I have zero technology background other than what I've learned through my history within the technology industry. And backing up your customer's data, it's easy with third parties. The backing up is the easy part of it. The recovery can be timely and costly, though, and sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes you need to recover into the cloud, and then it takes you days before you get the data back online. With the Scale platform, 3 clicks to recover a full VM, whether that be locally or remote. You can recover a file in under a minute, or you recover a full VM in under 5 minutes. So being able to do that all remotely, it reduces your costs in the grand scheme of things, because you're not spending your highly trained resources, the high cost resources to go recover these files. You can have anybody go in to recover these files and easy steps to show them how to recover these specific files. And it takes a few clicks, and they don't have to go on site. They don't need to get on the phone with any third party. You can call Scale to help you out, but I guarantee after you've seen it once, you'll be able to do that no problem. And recovery consumes your high-value resources. I just touched on this one, but you can manage everything remotely from. And the key thing is you manage it all from one single console. Whether it is 10 customers that you have, 50 customers that you have, 100 customers that you have. We built this for an instance where once it's fully deployed, our edge customer will be 6,000 to 7,000 sites. So we built a management console to be able to manage that many. If you have 50 customers, you can get the granularity of being able to manage all those customers from that one console, which I'll show you a little snippet of what that looks like in a second. And differentiating your services can be difficult because now everybody's offering the same variation like I showed on the last slide. Everybody has some sort of variation. The SLAs are very similar because they're getting that from the hardware manufacturers. With Scale, this is something that you can actually differentiate yourself. Leverage the technology within Scale to add value to your service levels that you're providing to your customers. Guarantee you can reduce the amount of time it takes to recover any data or anything for your customer. Just like we would have with any of our enterprise customers, they would need to have much quicker uptime. They wouldn't be okay to be down for 8 hours or be back up next business day. They would require that quick, immediate uptime. You can offer that same services for your customers, so we're bringing that downstream without the added cost of what it would take to add that downstream. And just overall, the traditional cost is it's very costly. As some systems, some of the appliances scale out better than others. Some of the other appliances are great when you only have 5 customers on it. All of a sudden, you have 20 customers, and you're looking at your monthly costs with that third-party vendor, and it's this ridiculous cost that you're thinking, hey, what if I could eliminate that cost? Well, with the Scale MSP program, that's really what this is built for. Our partners have been able to realize a fraction of the cost, and you being able to provide that premium service for your customers. Now, what does this all look like? So it's a full solution for your customers. It's a picture on the left and the right side there, you see your customer sites, and this is like kind of your hub and spoke model. So on the left and right there, you have customers of different variations of sizes, customers that might have some IT folks on-prem already. They might need the resources of an all-flash single node. Maybe it's an all-spinning single node, a hybrid cluster with some SSD, some spinning drives to keep the cost lower but keep the I/O high, an all-flash cluster because the only things that they're running are mission critical and they're super high I/O, or maybe they don't have anything and they just want to run everything remotely from you. Now, with all of these customers running a monthly cost, you can create that private public cloud for your customer where you're providing DR as a service for them. Even if they have an on-site, a cluster that they're managing for themselves on-site, you can provide them that extra level of service of the DR as a service that they can replicate back to your cluster. You can have multiple customers replicating back to a single cluster. You could have one customer replicating back to a single node, or you could leverage the Google Cloud as well and have them replicating back to Google Cloud. And from the perspective of administrative, how it appears administratively, it's the exact same as if you had your own cluster. Or if they don't have any hardware on-prem, they don't want to have any hardware on-prem, maybe they're 10 seats and under and they only have a couple of VMs, you could also just provide them with, you could basically provide infrastructure as a service for them, where you're spinning up those VMs and giving them access to those VMs. So you can provide all of these different things with the remote management of being able to manage it all under one single console. So to touch on those features, so not only is it servers, virtualization, and storage into this single platform, we're adding value and reducing the cost by adding these additional features that you typically have to go to third parties to get. It's not just the server hardware and there's storage, direct attached storage on there. The virtualization, all that, that's great. The value that we're adding to you, though, is really, first, it's the multi-cluster management, and you see at the top there, being able to manage all your customers from a single console, and being able to granularly group them all. So depending on how you needed to look at the different customers and how you need to pull them up, you can make it very granular on the VMs versus the stores. This is literally built for customers that have thousands of sites. So scaling this down makes it even easier, but it makes it less painful for you when you're having to manage all those sites. And then our HC3 backup suite, where you have backup replication, failover, and recovery, there's no additional cost for that. You don't have to pay anything over and above to be able to recover a file for your customer. If you have that DR as a service model like I showed on the other page, you don't have to add a third-party backup solution. You're getting the backup capabilities that are built into the Scale system with the premium DR capabilities that are there as well. So you're doing backup and true disaster recovery for them. Not just being able to recover something online and then, spend a lot of time and resources trying to get that back up in line. Now pricing, what does this all look like? So this is the MSP, the US pricing. This is basically what we've done with the pricing is instead of adding appliance, we've broken out the hardware and the software, and we've created a monthly cost for that instead. So a 4-drive system, which is the majority of the systems that you're going to be working with, that would be $175 over a 3-month term. And then the hardware, it's effectively a pass-through cost on the hardware. So just to dive into that a little further, I got more pricing examples here. So a single node, where it starts out at is $278 a month for that monthly cost of the $175 plus the hardware cost if we lease that over a 3-year term, or you lease it over a 1-year term, however we need to do that. So these are some, in the top there, that could be some of your customers at the edge where they're running a single node on-prem. And the bottom there, the cluster, that could be a cluster that your customer has. Maybe they need the redundancy, or that could be a cluster that you're replicating to, or you're replicating multiple customers into. And typically we see, depending on the size of the customer, the use cases that I've heard from many of the partners is that 10 VMs on a mid-sized cluster is typically where that break-even point is, and the cluster will support anywhere between 20 to 30 VMs. And these terms are very subjective because it depends on the size of cluster that you get and depends on the size of VMs that you're hosting. But just from an ROI perspective, you can realize that there's going to be a lot more savings and more customers that you can be able to add on to this. And I know it's a little bit difficult to sometimes realize, okay, well, what if I can't get all these customers up front? If you can't get all the customers up front to be able to justify the spend on the cluster, we have creative ways to make that work with pricing on the cluster. So if that comes up as a scenario, let's definitely talk about that. There's also the Cloud Unity that you can use as a stepping point, though. Instead of having all your customers replicating to a single cluster at first, and you can basically have your customers replicating back to a single instance within Google Cloud that looks exactly like you're managing a single node for them. However, that single node has the power of GCE and it's got the redundancy of GCE, so you don't need to worry about that being a single node. And for the purpose of this presentation, there's a Q1 Spiceworks promo. It's 1 year of HC3 Cloud Unity for free. So that's about a $6,000 end user MSRP, so end cost to the customer, around $6,000, that zero cost to that. There is one requirement that you need to purchase a DR planning service, and the DR planning service, there's a good value to that to yourselves and to the customer, that you could pass through that cost to the customer. MSRP to the customer is $2,500. Sell that wherever you want to sell that. But we're going to give them a full DR run book of what they need to do in the event of a failover. So get them all set up so that if they needed to have a failover, they're ready to go, and they have a beautiful run book where they can walk through, and anybody can walk through to get that everything spun up. Because in the event of a disaster, you never know who's going to have to do it. So that's the only basis of it, and so it's still it's only a $6,000 cost. If you wanted to go with a larger size instance in the cloud, we'll use that $6,000 as a credit towards the next one that you want. After year one, do whatever you want with it. You can continue to use Google, or you can use this as a stepping stone to start getting that 100% profit on the monthly cost that you'd be charging for DR, because there's no cost to this cloud for the year, and then you get a couple customers on this, and now you're going to be paying 100% profit. That's going to be able to justify getting a cluster. So come year two, you can have all your customers replicate back, continue to replicate to Google, or have them replicate to a central cluster where you can really see the profit start to grow from that perspective. Sure, there's a ton of questions there, so if you do have anything, type it in the chat. We can get to that after. And partnering with scale, this is my last slide right here before I pass the ball over to Mike. We do have a 5-star partner program. Very simple. We're very, I like to say, partner friendly. We want to work with our partners to grow with our partners, and that's the main goal of the partner program. To make you successful makes us successful. You growing out your MSP base will help us grow out our customer base as well, because from an MSP perspective, you're our customer. So the larger that you spread out to, the larger we're spreading out to. So whatever we can do to make this an equally profitable scenario for us. And the actual requirements, I know for many people that are familiar with other hyperconverged solutions, there's a ton of requirements to meet in order just to be able to sell the solution and get the expected margins that they want. There's no minimum requirements for us. It's very easy to sign up. It's literally a contract that you click, an electronic contract that you click accept to. It doesn't hold you into any commitments or anything like that. And then you'll be able to do everything from deal reg and get pricing, all the trainings, and all the engagement tools and everything that we have for sizing, configuration, lead gen, MDF, and all the sorts of that. With that said, I'm going to pass the ball over to Mike and let him jump into the UI for you. If anybody does have any questions, please feel free to email channel@scalecomputing.com. I'm on that alias, so after this I'll check it. Usually there's some good questions. If we can't get to the questions in the Q&A portion at the end of this. With that, Mikey, all you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Scott. So what we're looking at here is a basic 3-node cluster. And just before I even dig into that, to get to this point where I could actually log into, our user interface, bring up a browser to connect to it because you don't have to install anything, would really take as little as 30 minutes, which we have done a Spiceworks on the air where I actually racked and initialized the cluster and had it available externally even in that specific webinar in less than 30 minutes. You're going to spend more time discarding your packaging than you will setting it up. So it's really easy to get up and rolling and get a cluster initialized. The transition and learning curve is going to be very simple. We really wanted to create, what I like to call it, it's like an AWS on-premise. It's that cloud-like simplicity of, I'm just creating a VM, and that's the atomic unit of what I care about is a VM. I don't need to care about its back-end storage or where it's coming from. I need to know that it's highly available. I need to know that it's going to be fault tolerant, but I don't really care about what's underneath of it. And that's, the beauty of HCI, right? So I can create VMs, group them. At this point, we're just going through commodity x86 virtualization. But I'm creating a virtual machine, and that's all I'm going to care about because the hardware underneath is taking care of providing me the resources, and we're going to start it and run it on the optimal nodes. And if I want to get visibility into my overall cluster, I've got those optics as well as the individual VM level stats. Remotely, if you're managing multiple clusters, you can see both your remote clusters that you're using for replication. So if I can have multiple clusters connected in here. I can click right through to get access to those. Or you can use a multi-cluster management tool. This is designed really for, I would say, 10 or more clusters or remote single nodes. But it gives you the ability to, sort by specific performance metrics. You can filter and have groups of clusters that are, remedied based on what their state is. And you can create your own set of filters. But this is just a better view overall of what the remote site's going to look like, and then you again can click through and have access to those. Scott was mentioning Cloud Unity. I'm doing some replication to Cloud Unity from this cluster as well as others. But again, I can click through to my Cloud Unity remote node, and it's going to look exactly like a single node, as if it were a physical one racked somewhere. The difference is this is a virtual compute instance, so we've literally virtualized a single node, and it just runs as a compute instance on Google Legend. We handle all the hardware provisioning and all the billing. You're really just you've got one subscription that comes through us, and we handle everything. You just get a very easy to package and resell DR as a service option that, as Scott mentioned, is going to include runbook creation and guiding them through the process rather than just sending them out wild. So are there any other specific questions around the user interface or I guess from an MSP or service provider standpoint? Did I get all the highlights there, Scott?
Yeah, that's great. I think we did it in pretty good time too.
All right.
Okay. Scott, were you ready for questions?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Well, let me just remind everyone, you can continue to submit questions using that Q&A widget, and we'll get to as many as we can. So this first one here is, how are MSPs using Scale to provide DR services?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So like I just demonstrated, there's a couple of ways. There's either the option to resell Cloud Unity, but what most providers are doing is they're creating a central cluster and even starting at 3 nodes. And then they're having the remote sites, their customers replicate directly to your data center. So in essence, you're providing them a DR as a service cloud functionality, right? They're replicating back to you, you've already at this point, you're managing their network and you've got access and the connectivity is there. So, being able to add replication on is not a feature upsell or a license enablement. It's just a click in the UI and it's easy to get going. And because it's all built in, there's no licensing, it's easy. It's very easy to turn that into a high margin service for your customers. It's a good question.
All right, let's look at another question here. This one is from the IT guy. Is Scale ID 10T error friendly?
I think it is.
It was designed for the ID 10T in mind.
All right. So we're still looking for some more questions to come in. If anyone has those, go ahead and submit those in. So, Scott, any other comments you wanted to add before we finish up?
So I think there's a lot of information to take in. If anybody has any questions, you want to speak with anybody that's in your region, someone locally, or you want to shoot me any questions, feel free. Channel@scalecomputing.com is the easiest way. My email as well, smann, SMANN @scalecomputing.com. Any questions regarding pricing, the partner program, the MSP structure, or you just want to understand a little bit more of the technology, we're happy to take any of those.
All right. Well, thanks again for the presentation today, Scott and Mike. We appreciate it. And thanks to Scale for sponsoring this great session. I want to remind everyone before we close out that if you stepped away or missed any part of today's session, you'll get that link in your email to view it on demand. Also, check out the handouts that are available for download in the handouts window. And also, we do have the results from our contest, and that is getting posted right now in the attendee chat. And take a look for that information as well in our community in our contest page. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We look forward to another partner webinar here in the future. Everyone stay safe and keep it spicy. Take care all.